I used to think I was eating healthy. Every morning I boiled 2 eggs, quick and simple, full of protein. Sounded like a safe formula for middle age, but during a routine checkup, the doctor asked me a simple question. Are you sure your body is getting enough protein to maintain muscle? I answered reflexively, I eat eggs every day. He just shook his head, said nothing else, but that moment made me take a hard look at my entire eating routine. I went home and started researching, and I realized something that most people probably never think about. Eggs are not an optimal source of protein. They only provide about 13 g of protein per 100 g. Meanwhile, there are foods easy to find, easy to eat, that contain 3 to 5 times more protein, and very few people over 60 know that. The issue isn't about eating the right food anymore. The issue is this. If you don't get enough protein, you'll get weaker, not because you're aging, but because you're losing muscle. No pain, no fever, just moving slower, getting more tired when standing up, losing your balance more easily. That's not just natural aging. That's your body running low on the materials it needs to keep your muscles strong. I'm not sharing this to debate whether eating eggs is good or bad. I'm sharing this because I used to think that what I was doing was enough, and I know a lot of people out there still think the same. On the Elderly Way channel, I'll be sharing foods that are actually rich in protein, that can help people over 60 maintain their strength, prevent falls, and live independently for longer. If you're over 60 or taking care of a parent or loved one, leave a comment below. Where do you live? How strong do you feel these days? Don't hesitate to share. Every response helps me create content that meets real needs without the fluff. And if you found this helpful, hit follow on the Elderly Way channel right now. In the next video, I'll share 10 foods that are higher in protein than eggs, easy to find, easy to prepare, and suitable for older adults. Strength doesn't just disappear on its own. It fades day by day if you don't give your body what it needs to preserve it. We don't need to eat more. We just need to eat smarter. 10. Non-fat Greek yogurt, an effective and easily absorbed protein source for people over 60. For years, eggs were considered the gold standard of protein. I myself used to assume that eating a few eggs a day was enough to meet the body's protein needs. But after turning 60 and diving deeper into how to maintain muscle mass during aging, I realized that it's not just about the total amount of protein. It also depends on the type of protein, how well it's absorbed, and how suitable it is for a digestive system that naturally weakens with age. One simple but noteworthy food in this category is non-fat Greek yogurt. Unlike regular yogurt, Greek yogurt is strained multiple times to remove most of the water, lactose, and whey. This process results in a thicker, creamier yogurt that's significantly higher in protein, about 10.3 grams of protein per 100 grams, compared to 6.3 grams in the same amount of boiled eggs. With that kind of concentration, just 150-200 g serving a day can provide 15-20 g of protein without packing in too many calories, sugars, or saturated fats. That's especially important for older adults who are managing weight, visceral fat, or cholesterol. In addition to its high protein content, the kind of protein in Greek yogurt, primarily casein, digests slowly and delivers a steady stream of amino acids to the body over several hours. This is key for supporting ongoing muscle protein synthesis, which naturally declines with age. On top of that, most non-fat Greek yogurt contains live probiotic cultures that help improve gut health, which in turn supports nutrient absorption, including protein, vitamin B12, and minerals like zinc and calcium. Gut microbiome imbalance, a common issue in older adults, is an often overlooked factor when evaluating how well protein is absorbed and how effectively muscles recover. A 2020 study published in Nutrients found that older adults who consumed at least 20 g of dairy-based protein daily, combined with light exercise, such as brisk walking for 30 minutes a day, retained over 25% more muscle mass than the control group after 12 weeks. This means you don't need intense workouts or expensive supplements, just a smart, consistent, well-timed, and well-used food source. It's important to note that not all yogurt delivers these benefits. You'll need to choose a non-fat, unsweetened variety with no added flavors or canned fruits. Look for products labeled live and active cultures to ensure they contain beneficial probiotics. To boost nutritional value, you can add a tablespoon of ground flaxseed rich in omega-3s and lignans, or a handful of berries for antioxidants and blood sugar support. If your digestion is sensitive, you can blend the yogurt into smoothies or use it as a base for salad dressings instead of heavier, less healthy sauces. And finally, one very practical advantage: non-fat Greek yogurt is convenient. It's easy to store, easy to work into meals, requires no cooking, and is perfect for people who live alone, don't cook much, or need to manage portions. Most importantly, it's a science-backed choice, not a trend, not a guess. If you're looking for a way to get more protein each day, without stressing your digestion, raising cholesterol, or overcomplicating your routine, this is one of the best places to start. 9. Canned mackerel, a complete protein source, good for the heart and brain, easy to digest for older adults. Many seniors are advised to eat more fish, but most tend to think only of salmon, basa, or tuna. However, there's another fish that's rarely mentioned, yet highly impressive nutritionally: canned mackerel packed in water. It's one of the rare foods that meets 3 key criteria at once. It's high in quality protein, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and packed with essential micronutrients that people over 60 are often deficient in, especially vitamins B12 and D. On average, 100 grams of canned mackerel provides about 22 grams of protein, significantly more than eggs and on par with many lean meats. More importantly, it's a complete protein, meaning it contains all 9 essential amino acids the human body cannot produce on its own. Protein absorption from fish is also very high, over 90%, according to assessments by the FAO/WHO. Mackerel also stands out for its long-chain omega-3 content, EPA and DHA, which have anti-inflammatory effects throughout the body. This is crucial for slowing down muscle loss, sarcopenia, and cognitive decline in older adults. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that seniors who ate 2-3 servings of fatty fish per week maintained 18% better muscle strength, compared to those who ate little or no fish. Omega-3s also help improve blood circulation to muscle tissue, support recovery after injury, and reduce the risk of dementia. Beyond that, canned mackerel contains a significant amount of vitamin B12, 89 mcg per 100 g, nearly 3 times the recommended daily intake. Vitamin B12 deficiency is common in people over 60 due to decreased stomach absorption. A lack of this vitamin reduces red blood cell production, causes fatigue, muscle weakness, and negatively affects peripheral nerves. Mackerel is also rich in vitamin D, 360 IU per 100 g, which supports calcium absorption, maintains bone density, and strengthens muscles. One practical advantage that shouldn't be overlooked: canned mackerel is easy to store, requires no cooking, and is ideal for those living alone or with limited ability to cook. It's important to choose the water-packed kind, not oil-packed, to minimize saturated fat and sodium. Always check the nutrition label. Look for varieties with less than 150 mg of sodium per serving and no added synthetic preservatives. As for how to use it, canned mackerel can be eaten directly with whole grain bread, mixed into green salads, or used as a topping for brown rice, savory oatmeal, or brown rice noodles. To boost fiber and healthy fats, it can be paired with avocado, white beans, or extra virgin olive oil. One thing to avoid is heavy frying. high heat can destroy omega-3s and denature proteins. Unlike many expensive fresh fish, canned mackerel is an affordable, sustainable, and nutrient-dense option, perfect for maintaining physical strength without major lifestyle or budget changes. A daily portion of 100–120 grams can deliver an ideal amount of protein along with healthy fats, essential vitamins, and clinically proven health benefits. 8. Nutritional yeast, a complete plant-based protein that supports muscle and energy in older adults. If you're looking for a plant-based food that's easy to digest, rich in complete protein, and versatile enough to add to various dishes without overpowering their flavor, nutritional yeast is worth considering. This isn't the type of yeast used for baking. It's an inactive yeast that's been cultivated and dried, typically found in fine flakes or powder form. It has a pale yellow color and a naturally mild, cheese-like taste. Just 100 grams of nutritional yeast provides about 45–50 grams of protein, more than eggs, chicken, and many common animal-based proteins. More importantly, it contains all 9 essential amino acids, something rarely found in plant protein sources. This makes it especially beneficial for older adults, whose bodies tend to absorb nutrients less efficiently. It helps maintain muscle mass, aids in recovery after physical activity, and may help prevent mobility decline. Another significant advantage is how easy it is to digest and how gentle it is on the gut. Unlike legumes and seeds, which can cause bloating or require lengthy soaking and cooking, nutritional yeast can be consumed directly, doesn't irritate the intestines, and is usually well tolerated, even by those with irritable bowel syndrome or absorption issues. For people with dental problems, poor appetite, low digestive enzyme levels, or fatigue during meals, it's a simple way to boost protein intake without having to chew or swallow large volumes of food. Beyond protein, nutritional yeast is rich in B vitamins, especially B1, B2, B6, and B12 when fortified. For older adults, B vitamins play a critical role in energy metabolism, nerve function, and immune support. B vitamin deficiencies are common after age 60, often due to decreased absorption, reduced meat intake, or medications that interfere with B-complex metabolism, such as long-term use of metformin or antacids. In addition, nutritional yeast is a good source of zinc, selenium, magnesium, and the antioxidant glutathione, all of which help protect muscle cells, reduce oxidative stress, and support tissue recovery after activity. It contains no cholesterol, no gluten, no sugar, and no preservatives, making it suitable for vegetarian, low-fat, or metabolic condition-friendly diets. It's also incredibly versatile. You can sprinkle it on soup, stir it into savory oatmeal, toss it over roasted vegetables, blend it into a protein smoothie, or mix it into rice, eggs, or sauces as a cheese substitute. Just 2–3 tablespoons per day, about 15–20 g, can give you over 10 g of protein, almost the same as 2 eggs, without adding cholesterol or fat. A small note of caution: if you're watching your sodium intake or have high blood pressure, opt for unsalted or low-sodium versions. Also, look for B12 fortified varieties if you don't regularly eat meat or dairy. In short, nutritional yeast is a nutrient-dense, affordable, shelf-stable, and easy-to-use food that fits seamlessly into everyday meals. It's a powerful tool for helping adults over 60 get high-quality protein without placing extra strain on the body. 7. Pumpkin seeds. Compact, protein-rich, and beneficial for muscles, bones, and sleep in older adults. Among the many types of seeds often seen as snack food, pumpkin seeds are perhaps the most underrated in terms of nutritional value, especially for those over 60. Just 100 grams of pumpkin seeds contain around 19 grams of protein, higher than most nuts, beans, and even surpassing eggs and many types of dairy. But what makes pumpkin seeds stand out isn't just the protein content. It's the unique combination of minerals and amino acids that support the muscular, skeletal, and nervous systems, all of which tend to weaken with age. The protein in pumpkin seeds contains relatively high levels of the amino acids leucine, arginine, and glutamate. Leucine, in particular, plays a key role in triggering muscle protein synthesis, a core process for preserving and rebuilding lean muscle mass in older adults. While pumpkin seeds aren't a complete protein source, they lack lysine. It's easy to complement them with foods like yogurt, grains, or legumes to create a meal that includes all essential amino acids. Beyond protein, pumpkin seeds are among the richest food sources of magnesium, about 262 mg per 100 grams, which is roughly 65% of the recommended daily intake. Magnesium is vital for over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, including muscle contraction, protein synthesis, heart rhythm regulation, and nerve signal transmission. In older adults, magnesium deficiency is often linked to nighttime leg cramps, chronic muscle weakness, insomnia, and an increased risk of osteoporosis. Getting magnesium from food rather than supplements is generally safer and more stable, especially for those with reduced kidney function. Pumpkin seeds also provide a significant amount of zinc and iron, two essential minerals for immune function, oxygen transport to muscles, and tissue repair. Many older individuals have low zinc reserves due to a monotonous diet or poor gut absorption. This can result in slow wound healing, persistent fatigue despite adequate eating, and unexplained weakness. Adding pumpkin seeds, which contain an average of 7–8 mg of zinc per 100 grams, can help improve these issues noticeably. Another interesting point: pumpkin seeds contain tryptophan, a precursor to serotonin and melatonin, two compounds that influence mood and sleep quality. For older adults who struggle with insomnia, shallow sleep, or disrupted circadian rhythms, a light evening snack that includes pumpkin seeds, paired with slow-digesting carbohydrates like oats or ripe bananas, may naturally improve sleep quality without medication. To gain the nutritional benefits without adding metabolic strain, choose raw, unsalted, unroasted pumpkin seeds and consume about 20–30 grams per day. This portion size provides a healthy boost of protein, magnesium, and zinc without exceeding caloric limits, especially important if you're managing weight, blood sugar, or cholesterol. Pumpkin seeds can be eaten on their own, sprinkled over yogurt, mixed into porridge or salads, or used in place of peanuts in savory dishes. For a change in taste, you can lightly roast them at low temperatures under 160 degrees C or 320 degrees F to preserve their oils and nutrients. In short, pumpkin seeds are a compact but nutritionally powerful food, rich in protein, essential minerals, and compounds that support restful sleep. They're a practical, reliable choice for anyone looking to boost strength, energy, and quality of life after 60, without relying on pills or complicated diets. Simple, effective, and easy to incorporate into a daily routine without disrupting your current lifestyle. 6. Cooked chickpeas, a balanced plant-based protein source for muscle, gut, and metabolic support in aging. Among the list of foods that support muscle strength in older adults, chickpeas are often overlooked, dismissed under the assumption that plant-based protein is weaker than meat or eggs. But in reality, for people over 60, chickpeas are one of the smartest choices thanks to their ability to deliver protein, soluble fiber, and a range of micronutrients that help regulate inflammation, a key factor in muscle loss over time. Just 100 g of cooked chickpeas provides about 8–9 g of protein, less than lean meat or soy, but they're rich in lysine and isoleucine, two amino acids essential for muscle fiber repair and maintenance of lean mass. While chickpeas aren't a complete protein on their own, when combined with whole grains like brown rice or oats, they form a complete protein that's just as effective as animal sources. and much easier for aging digestive systems to process. What really stands out is their fiber content, around 7 g per 100 g, most of which is soluble fiber. This type of fiber doesn't just help regulate blood sugar, it also feeds the gut microbiota, which tends to weaken with age. A healthy gut microbiome is tightly linked to better nutrient absorption, lower systemic inflammation, and the production of vitamin K and SCFAs, short-chain fatty acids, all of which help maintain muscle cell energy and improve insulin sensitivity. A long-term study published in the Journal of Gerontology found that older adults with a diverse and balanced gut microbiome retained over 18% more skeletal muscle mass than those with poor microbiota profiles, even when total protein intake was the same. Chickpeas are also a rich source of folate, 170 mcg per 100 g, manganese, magnesium, and non-heme iron, all of which play key roles in cellular energy metabolism and tissue regeneration. These nutrients are often deficient in older adults, and their absence can hinder protein synthesis even when dietary protein intake is adequate. In particular, folate is essential for red blood cell production, which ensures efficient oxygen delivery to muscles during everyday physical activity. Another major advantage is practicality. Chickpeas can be cooked in advance, frozen, and stored long-term. They're easy to incorporate into a variety of dishes, stews, salads, soups, mashed spreads, or blended with olive oil, garlic, and lemon to make hummus. When soaked for at least 8 hours and cooked thoroughly, chickpeas become very easy to digest and don't cause the bloating common with other legumes, even for those with IBS or enzyme deficiencies. The recommended daily serving for older adults is about 3/4 cup, 125 g cooked, providing nearly 10 g of protein, 9 g of fiber, almost 20% of daily folate needs, and a meaningful dose of essential minerals. This is a safe and appropriate amount for seniors without advanced kidney disease, with no need to worry about uric acid or purines like with many animal proteins. As chronic inflammation, muscle loss, and poor digestion become increasingly common in people over 60, chickpeas offer a nutritional, sustainable, and easy-to-integrate solution. They're more than just food. They're part of a long-term strategy to maintain mobility, support muscle recovery, and promote healthy aging, without relying solely on medications or expensive supplements. We've just gone through the first 5 foods, and if you paid attention, this isn't some casual fun facts list. Each one was chosen not just because it packs more protein than eggs, but because it truly fits the needs of the body after 60. When digestion slows down, nutrient absorption weakens, muscle synthesis becomes less efficient, and the risk of silent inflammation rises. Non-fat Greek yogurt, easy to digest, rich in casein and probiotics, helps with nutrient absorption and maintaining muscle. Canned mackerel in water, a complete protein source, high in omega-3s, convenient and excellent for heart, brain, and joint health. Nutritional yeast, plant-based protein that's easy on the gut, rich in B vitamins, no cooking required, great for those with low appetite or trouble chewing. Pumpkin seeds, small but loaded with protein, plus magnesium and zinc to support muscle contraction, sleep, and recovery. Cooked chickpeas, an ideal source of both protein and fiber, helps feed good gut bacteria, reduce systemic inflammation, and preserve lean muscle mass. What do they all have in common? They're easy to find, affordable, and don't require major lifestyle changes. Just small swaps, like replacing your morning boiled egg with unsweetened yogurt, swapping a meat-based meal for a chickpea stew, or adding a spoonful of pumpkin seeds to your porridge, and you're doing what many older adults miss: taking action to preserve your muscle strength before it's gone, because muscle loss doesn't send a warning. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't bleed. But one day you notice you're getting up slower, stairs feel steeper, and then you fall when no one's around. These changes start at the biological level, and your daily meals are where you can step in. If this information is useful, don't just watch. Act. Pick one of the 5 foods, buy it, try it, track how you feel for a week. And if you take care of your parents or older loved ones, share this video with them. Not to know more, but to start changing. The Elderly Way channel wasn't created to preach about senior health, but to offer practical tools, simple, science-backed, that help you take control and stay independent longer. Part 2 will dive into even more powerful foods, some of which are currently used in rehab centers to help patients recover after strokes. They're not mainstream, but they work. And you'll be the first to know if you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us on this journey. Muscle doesn't fade with age. It fades when you stop feeding it right. And today, you've learned exactly where to begin.